Eternal life sounds perfect until you hear this. Imagine this: you wake up tomorrow and someone tells you the secret to eternal life has been discovered. Not metaphorical eternity, not spiritual rebirth or reincarnation, actual, biological, never die again immortality. No aging, no disease, no end. You could live for millions of years, watch civilizations rise and fall, see the stars burn out one by one, and still be here. Sounds perfect, right? But hold on. There's a question buried deep inside that fantasy that most of us never stop to ask. Would eternal life really be a gift, or could it become a curse so unbearable that even death would feel like mercy? That's the question we're going to explore in this video. And I'm not here to give you a simple answer. I'm here to take you on a journey, a mental, emotional, philosophical roller coaster that will leave you questioning not just eternal life, but life itself. Because once we really look at the implications of immortality, things get weird, and dark, and uncomfortably real.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Let's start with the surface level appeal. Eternal life means no fear of death. That alone sounds like the ultimate human fantasy. Every religion, every myth, every civilization has dreamed of escaping the grave. The fountain of youth, the philosopher's stone, cryogenics, uploading our minds into machines, reincarnation. We are obsessed with the idea that maybe, just maybe, we don't have to die. Because death is the great unknown, the great ending, the moment when everything we are disappears. So naturally, we dream of skipping it, staying alive forever. But what if that dream is based on a misunderstanding of what life actually is? Here's the thing: life is not just the absence of death. It's not just a biological process. Life, as we experience it, is meaningful because it's limited. Because time is ticking. Because every moment could be the last. That's what gives urgency to our choices. That's what makes now matter more than later. When you remove the end, you remove the edge. And when you remove the edge, you might just remove the meaning. Let's go deeper. Imagine you live forever. At first, it's euphoric. You learn languages. You travel the world. You master every instrument. You fall in love again and again. You build empires. You see the future arrive. AI, space colonies, post-scarcity utopias. But after a few thousand years, something starts to shift. You've seen everything. You've done everything. But you've read every book, watched every film, climbed every mountain, solved every puzzle. There's nothing new under your sun. Now imagine continuing for another million years, and another, and another. The stars begin to die. The galaxies drift apart. The universe grows cold, thin, and dark. And you're still here, watching, waiting, existing. Not because you want to, but because you can't not exist. Ask yourself this: what happens to the human soul when time becomes infinite? Can desire survive that kind of eternity? Can love? Can curiosity? Most of us build our lives around goals, around hope, around progress. But eternity removes the need for progress. But why do something today when you have infinite tomorrows? Why fall in love when you've done it 10,000 times before? Why create art when every idea has been explored a billion years ago? You see, the human psyche is not built for infinity. It's built for urgency, for limitation. That's what gives our actions weight. That's what makes yes mean something because you had to say no to everything else. Let me hit you with something deeper. What if death isn't the opposite of life, but the thing that makes life possible? Think about that. We assume that death ends life, but maybe it actually defines it. If you remove death, you don't just extend life, you change it. Fundamentally, eternity might not be life stretched out. It might be something else entirely, something alien, something unrecognizable. And now we arrive at the real philosophical twist. If eternal life strips us of meaning, if it numbs us to desire, if it breaks the structure of human motivation, then maybe death isn't our enemy. Maybe it's our greatest ally, not because it's pleasant, not because we want it, but because it limits us. And in that limitation we find purpose, we find movement, we find the courage to act, to choose, to love, now because we know we won't get the chance forever. So when someone asks, would you want to live forever? Don't answer too quickly. First ask yourself, what would I actually do with forever? And what kind of person would I become if nothing ever ended? Because the truth is, we don't just fear death. We also fear meaninglessness. And eternal life, stripped of urgency, might just be the most meaningless existence imaginable. The curse of the unkillable. Why immortality could destroy everything that makes us human. Let's imagine what it really means to be unkillable. Not in some superhero sense where you still feel pain and take risks, but in the purest, most absolute version of the word, you can't die. At all. No matter what happens, explosions, disease, war, time itself, you remain. Or forever. At first glance, it sounds like a cheat code for life. Unlimited chances, boundless potential, infinite exploration. But now, let's look closer. Because when you strip away the glamour, what you're left with is something far more disturbing than anyone wants to admit. Immortality doesn't just change your fate, it changes you. Your personality, your values, your relationships, your capacity to feel joy or sorrow. Think about it. Who would you be if consequences disappeared from your life? If every decision you made could always be revised later, if every mistake became irrelevant in a sea of infinite tomorrows, if every bond you formed eventually faded into a blur of centuries, would you still care deeply? Would you still act boldly? Would you still love fully? And here's the terrifying part, maybe you wouldn't. We often forget that our emotional depth comes from our fragility. We love fiercely because we know we might lose. We cry because things end. We celebrate milestones because they are rare and fleeting. Every intense human experience is grounded in the knowledge that it won't last. That's what makes it real. But take away that impermanence and something starts to rot. The soul doesn't know how to care about infinity. The heart doesn't know how to ache for something that will always be available. Now let's take this even further. Imagine watching everyone you love die over and over again. Friends, family, lovers, children. You stay. They go. Again and again and again. What does that do to your empathy, to your sense of connection? After the 100th loss, the 1000th funeral, the 1,000,000th goodbye, do you still feel it? Or do you start detaching just to survive? In trying to escape death, you may become something less than human, an observer, not a participant. A ghost trapped in a body that won't decay. And what about morality? If you knew you had infinite time, would you still feel urgency to do good, to take responsibility, to make your life count? Or would you say, I'll get to it eventually, and then never do it at all? We like to think we'd be noble, but the truth is, most of us struggle to stay focused with just 80 years. What happens when we're given 80 million? This is the core of the curse. Immortality slowly erodes the conditions that make us human. Not just our biology, but our essence. Our need for meaning, our hunger for connection, our drive to act. And without those, what's left? A being that exists, but doesn't live. And a creature that moves through time, but no longer feels its weight. This is where the ancient philosophers were wiser than we give them credit for. The Greeks spoke of ataraxia, a kind of inner peace that comes not from having everything, but from accepting limits. The Stoics reminded us that death is not to be feared, but to be used as a compass, a motivator, a teacher. Even in Eastern philosophy, the idea of impermanence is not a tragedy, but a sacred truth. Everything changes, everything ends, and that's why it matters. So here's the question that should haunt us more than death: what happens to a creature who forgets how to care? Because that's the real danger of eternal life. Not boredom, not loneliness, but apathy. A slow, creeping erosion of everything that makes life vibrant. The longer you live without limits, the more those limits start to feel irrelevant. And once they're gone, so are you. Not physically but spiritually. You become a shell, an echo. So maybe the real question isn't, do you want to live forever? Maybe it's, are you willing to stop being human in order to never stop existing? And if that's the price, is it really worth it? The paradox of perfection, why an infinite life would break our minds. Let's be honest, most of us don't just want to live forever. We want to live a perfect forever. We imagine immortality as a state of endless improvement, where we finally have the time to become everything we ever dreamed of. We'll learn every language, master every instrument, travel to every country, accumulate infinite wisdom, become emotionally flawless, intellectually limitless, spiritually transcendent. In our fantasy, eternal life is the ultimate self-upgrade, a path to perfection with no deadline. But here's the paradox: perfection and infinity don't mix. Not the way we imagine. Because if everything becomes possible, then nothing becomes meaningful. If you can do everything, then nothing stands out. If you have infinite time, then perfection becomes not remarkable, but inevitable and ultimately boring. And that boredom isn't just uncomfortable. It's psychologically corrosive. Think about how the human brain works. We are wired for contrast, for tension, for novelty. We crave the unknown, the uncertain, the unfinished. Our minds are built to solve problems, to chase progress, to strive for something just out of reach. That's what drives creativity, ambition, even love. It's the gap between who we are and who we want to be that gives our lives momentum. But what happens when there's no more gap? When you've read every book, had every experience, mastered every skill, and perfected every aspect of yourself, you break. Not physically, but mentally, because the very engine that powers your identity, the tension of becoming, is gone. You don't become someone new. You are everything already, And so there's nothing left to do, nothing left to want, nothing left to dream. This is the silent horror of perfection. It doesn't feel like joy. It feels like stillness, like a mirror that reflects forever but never changes. And human beings were not made for that kind of stillness. We were made to evolve, to fail and try again, to fall short and reach, to live in tension with our own limitations and grow through that tension. Now, imagine trying to sustain your sanity through that kind of eternal stillness. But imagine waking up each day knowing that nothing truly matters because you've already arrived at the destination. There's no risk, no real stakes, no real need. You don't fear death. You don't fear failure. You don't fear loss. And without those fears, what's left to push against? Here's where it gets even deeper. The idea of perfection assumes that there's a final version of your best self, that once achieved makes all suffering worthwhile. But that's a myth. There is no final version. And you are not a product to be completed. You are a process, a constant unfolding, a story still being written. And the moment you try to freeze that story in some perfect state, you kill what makes it alive. That's the paradox. To be perfect is to stop changing, and to stop changing is to stop being. So ironically, eternal life in pursuit of perfection may be the fastest way to destroy your identity. You become a statue of yourself, polished, flawless, and hollow. Let me ask you something personal. Can you remember a moment in your life when everything was perfect just for a second? A sunset, a laugh, a kiss, a victory. And that moment was meaningful because it passed, because it was fragile, because it couldn't stay. Now imagine freezing that moment forever, never moving on, never feeling the contrast of loss or change. What once felt perfect now feels suffocating, like a song that never ends, even after it's stopped being beautiful. We think we want perfection, but maybe what we really want is progress with purpose. A journey, not a destination. A life that moves, not one that loops. Because in the loop, there is no story, just repetition, just echo, just noise. So maybe the real danger of eternal life isn't just endless time. Maybe it's the illusion that time can fix everything. That if we just have enough of it, we'll finally become enough. But you are not enough because you're perfect. You're enough because you're real, because you're changing, because you're trying. And that's something eternity can never offer. The final mercy, why the end is what gives life its only meaning. Here's the truth we spend our whole lives avoiding. Everything ends. Every laugh, every love, every dream, every breath. And yet, it's this very ending, the inescapable finality, that gives each moment its weight. We fear it, yes, but we also need it. Without an end, life becomes shapeless, directionless, a song that never resolves, a story that never concludes. And the more we try to escape the end, the more we risk losing the very meaning we came here to find. Think about a movie you love. Imagine if it never ended. No climax, no resolution, just an endless loop of scenes with no direction. The characters would stop developing. The plot would dissolve. The emotional tension would fade. And eventually you'd walk away, bored, numb, detached. That's not just a bad movie, it's a metaphor for eternal life without death, A life with no final act becomes a life with no arc, no urgency, no catharsis. And the end is not the enemy. It's the frame that makes the picture beautiful. We don't cry at the end of a story because it's over. We cry because it meant something, because it moved us, because we felt it. And we felt it because it was finite. That's the essence of meaning. It arises from limitation, or from choice, from the knowledge that we don't get infinite chances, that we must decide, act, love, forgive now because tomorrow is not promised. This is what eternal life, as we imagine it, can never give us. It removes the stakes. It dilutes our decisions. It makes every moment interchangeable with the next. And when everything becomes possible forever, nothing feels urgent anymore. Nothing feels sacred. Without death, time isn't precious, it's just noise. Let me ask you something. If you knew that today was your last day, what would you do differently? You'd probably speak more honestly, love more deeply, waste less time, and forgive someone. Let go of something petty. You'd actually live. But why wait for death to teach us how to live? Why not let the awareness of the end shape how we move through life, not with fear, but with clarity? Philosophers like Heidegger called this being toward death, the idea that living authentically means living with the end in mind. Not in a morbid way, but in a way that sharpens your presence. That makes you look at your life and ask, is this how I want to spend my limited days? Is this who I want to be before the curtain falls? And what if that curtain never fell? What if you kept pushing it back, century after century, until time itself lost all meaning? Would you still be you? Or would you become something else, someone who no longer feels urgency, no longer feels awe, no longer feels anything? That's the final mercy of death. It reminds us that every moment matters. Not because it lasts, but because it doesn't. Because it's fleeting. Because it's here, and then it's gone. And in that fragility we find not despair, but beauty. We've been told to fear the end. But maybe we should fear its absence more. Maybe death is not the thing that ruins life, but the thing that makes it possible. Maybe the fact that we don't live forever isn't a flaw in the system, it's the system's greatest wisdom. A whisper in the dark that says, be here, be now, be real, because this won't last. And maybe that's the most powerful truth of all, that the end is not a failure. It's a gift, a boundary that transforms time into meaning, love into urgency, and life into something worth living. So the next time you catch yourself craving forever, ask yourself instead, what if the point was never to live forever? What if the point was to live fully before it ends? That's the real challenge. That's the real beauty. And that's why eternal life, as perfect as it sounds, might just be the one thing that would take life's meaning away. Because the end is what makes everything else real.